Hello everyone, and welcome to Community Corner, a monthly segment here on Darshan TV that's presented by South Asian Americans Leading Together, or SALT. My name is Deepa Iyer, and I'm your host for Community Corner. I'm also the director of SALT, which is a national nonprofit organization located in the DC metropolitan area. SALT addresses issues affecting the South Asian community here in the United States through advocacy, community education, and leadership development programs. Last month on Community Corner, we looked at the issue of mental health, and this month we are going to address the issue of bias and discrimination affecting South Asians. In order to do that, I have two knowledgeable guests here with me, whom I'd like to introduce to you. We have Rajdeep Singh Jolly, who is the Washington, D.C.-based representative of the Sikh Coalition, which is a national organization that addresses issues affecting the Sikh community through legal services and assistance, advocacy, and community education. We also have Nadia Ferozvi, who is a staff attorney at the Asian Pacific American Legal Resource Center, which is an organization here in the D.C. metropolitan area that provides legal services to low-income Asians. Nadia is also a member of the Capital Area Muslim Bar Association. Welcome to Community Corner, Nadia and Rajdeep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, we're going to look at the issue of bias and discrimination on today's Community Corner segment. I want to first talk to both of you, Nadia and Rajdeep, about the different forms of bias and discrimination that exist. There are so many. We know, for example, that many South Asian children face bullying and teasing when they're in the school cafeteria or the playground, for example. We know that South Asians often don't get jobs because of the fact that they're discriminated against because of their accent or the country that they're from. And we also know that some South Asians face actual hate crimes, where they're the victims of a brutal murder or assault or other forms of violent harassment. So let's unpack these different forms of bias and discrimination. And I want to start with you, Rajdeep, to tell us a little bit about bullying and what happens to children often in schools, and how you believe bullying and school-based discrimination can actually be addressed.
Absolutely. Thanks, first of all, for having us, Deepa. Our organization, the Sikh Coalition, in 2007 wrote a report entitled Hatred in the Hallways. And according to that report, which was based on surveys of Sikh students throughout New York City, approximately 75% of Sikh students in the Queensborough of New York City reported that they had been bullied. And in terms of examples, and this is sort of ironic in the context of that report, a year after it was written, in May 2008, a Sikh student in New Jersey had his turban set on fire by a bully in the schoolyard. The following month in New York City, another Sikh student had his facial sort of orbital bone broken by a bully who was attempting to remove his turban. These are only sort of the more high-profile examples of bullying which have taken place in New York, and unfortunately this is a problem which affects Sikhs nationwide.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about what the Sikh Coalition as well as school districts are doing to address this form of bullying that's based on religious targeting?
Absolutely. There are three steps which we've taken. In the first place, the Sikh Coalition has on its website a subsection called Khalsa Kids, and it is composed of resources, literature, age-specific, age-appropriate literature for students and for parents. And it addresses strategies for dealing with bullying, avoiding it, and solving the problem after it's happened. That's one step that we've taken. In New York City, locally, the Sikh Coalition has undertaken a grassroots effort to strengthen regulations. All students have the right to report bullying and seek remedies and relief for bullying incidents. And the third approach that we've taken is to address the problem on a federal level. There's a federal law that's being considered by the U.S. Congress called the Safe Schools Improvement Act, and the Sikh Coalition is a strong supporter of that legislation.
So Nadia, let's look at another form of bias and discrimination that affects South Asians, and that's in the context of workplace discrimination. I know that for the Muslim community, especially since 9/11, there have been a range of different incidents that have occurred. I wanted you to address a little bit of that and focus in on workplace discrimination specifically.
Sure. Thank you again for having me as well. In terms of the discrimination that has occurred in a post 9/11 basis, I think there have been a lot of hasty conclusions about the Muslim community in particular. And these hasty conclusions relate to religious beliefs, relate to violent tendencies, relate to all manners of things. And that has infiltrated in a lot of different areas, including workplace. And so then you have things, for example, like vandalism at the mosques, or personal crimes against against individuals who are wearing hijab and things like that. That translates into the workplace as well. And so there have been instances when people in the workplace are not able to pray. For example, they're not able to be given opportunity to pray as is religiously mandated. There are women who wear hijab or the head covering who have been denied work, who have been denied applications, who have been denied any degree of employment. There are also individuals who have walked into particular locations who are denied services on account of longer beards, for example, on account of hijab, on various other things. And so this is happening on a more and more regular basis, and there are organizations that are tabulating this information.
And it's important to remember from what you're saying that people do have the right to request prayer time in the workplace.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
And so there are federal laws, local laws that protect our religious rights in the workplace as
Absolutely. There are local and federal laws that do so.
A third form of bias and discrimination that we've been monitoring in the South Asian community, and that is the issue of hate crimes. Now, this is a very pernicious issue, and I wanted, Rajdeep, for you to first tell us what is a hate crime, and why is a hate crime different from any other sort of crime that occurs?
Yes, a hate crime is defined as a crime which is motivated by bias. And what makes it different from an ordinary crime is that it is designed to intimidate members of a group because of their membership in that group. And the law treats it as a special category, as a separate category, because it's much more egregious than a regular crime.
So can you give us an example, perhaps, of a hate crime that occurred perhaps after 9/11 to show us how that particular crime did not just target the victim, but it also targeted an entire community?
Yes, unfortunately, the first victim of post 9/11 backlash was a Sikh American named Mr. Balbir Singh Sodhi. He was shot and killed on September 15, 2001 by someone who mistook him for someone from the Middle East. And it created quite a lot of fear within the Sikh community and the Arab and Muslim and South Asian community, because the assailant, the murderer in that case, thought that he was actually addressing the problem of terrorism, and he thought that he was targeting an Arab. And in fact, in the course of his rampage, he attempted to murder an Afghan family and someone else of Middle Eastern extraction. So his objective was really to terrorize members of these communities.
Okay, so we've heard a little bit about bullying, we've heard about workplace discrimination, and even broader targeting of entire communities, especially in the post 9/11 environment. And it's important to remember that while these sorts of incidents happen, that our communities do have resources that we can turn to. And so now I want to talk a little bit about what those resources are. Nadia, I know that many in the South Asian community often are wondering sometimes whether they should report an incident of bias. Can you talk a little bit about why our community doesn't report, and also why it's important to report?
There are several reasons why the community doesn't report, and this isn't just indicative of the South Asian community, but on a general basis, I think, for those who do experience bias and discrimination. There's definitely fear of retaliation on the part of the person who is actually doing the discriminating. There's fear that they may retaliate in some way that is perhaps not just a comment anymore, but perhaps some degree of violence or something along those lines. There's also just not wanting to make a hassle, not wanting to make a fuss towards the police, to supervisory bodies or anything along those lines, and just sort of wanting to get through the day. And that happens a lot with the immigrant community. The immigrant community often sort of fears wanting to subject itself to more and wanting to sort of demonstrate itself as a community that's being persecuted against or that's being discriminated against. And so there are several reasons why people don't necessarily report crimes. But as you said, it's significantly important to report not just crimes, but just incidents of bias and discrimination. In order for these things to stop, it's important to report these things so that we as community members can educate those who are committing discrimination, and that we as community members can also educate those who may experience discrimination so that they know they can report it to someone so that it can stop.
So a lot of times our communities may not want to rock the boat.
Absolutely.
Right? We may not want to go to the authorities. We may not want to go to the teacher if it's our child. But what I think you're saying is that it's important to do that, to document what's happening.
Absolutely.
To perhaps educate others about our own cultural beliefs, our religious beliefs, and also, in some cases, because we have rights. And we need to be able to enforce them.
And in many instances, the discriminating behavior is in fact a crime. So it's very important to report that to the police or to some sort of law enforcement authority so that this crime is in fact, enforced and prosecuted against.
So what should someone do, Rajdeep, if they are the victim or they believe that they're the victim of a bias incident? What are the steps that they should take?
Right. At the outset, in an emergency, in any emergency, the most important step is to call the police, dial 911, and report the incident, and to seek medical assistance. Those are the most important steps to take at the outset. After that, it's important to make sure that the crime or the incident is documented in writing. Make sure you record the names and contact information of witnesses, for example. If anything was said to you in the incident or during the incident, make sure to document that, write it down. At the tail end of this process, you should contact a community organization such as SALT, such as the Sikh Coalition, to make sure that they're able to leverage their connections with law enforcement to make sure that you receive the assistance that you are entitled to.
Beyond reporting to the FBI, beyond reporting to police, beyond seeking assistance from community groups, we're also aware that there are laws that exist that actually protect many South Asians who are victims of these sorts of incidents. Nadia, could you tell us a little bit about the local laws in the D.C. metropolitan area that might be resources for South Asians?
Sure. So all three, as I stated, all three jurisdictions, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, do have laws in place that are there to protect individuals who have been victims of bias-related or discriminating-related crimes. And not just crimes, but just sort of incidents on a general basis. So from a crime standpoint, by virtue of being a victim of a crime, there's obviously the sort of the prosecution end that the police will sort of be involved in. But there's also the potential for individuals to file a lawsuit against the perpetrator, for example, if they chose to do so. There's the need to sort of become a witness in some of these things. And I think what Rajdeep was saying about documenting all of this is very useful in those contexts. When it comes to, I guess maybe workplace discrimination or other incidents of discrimination, there's, reporting, and there's also the ability to file a complaint. And these complaints are often administrative complaints in the sense that they're not necessarily something that you will get money out of. In some instances you can, though. But these complaints will go through sort of like the HR department of some of these offices and also then go to the human rights offices of the different governments that you are necessarily filing in. So Maryland, for example, has a human rights office, and you can file a complaint against an employer, against a fellow employee, for example, a colleague who may be discriminating against you. And it's important to sort of document as much information as you can, have as many details as possible, dates, were there any other witnesses? Did anyone else see what was going on? Did anyone else experience this? Does anyone else know that other people have experienced this kind of thing? And so documenting that information and reporting it is very useful, and then an investigation will be undertaken by the government, and hopefully they'll make a sort of determination in one's favor.
So we've talked about the different forms of bias and discrimination. We've talked about some of the resources, the laws, the community groups that can be of assistance. And I want to end by asking a question about what our own role is as South Asians. Can you talk a little bit about that, Rajdeep? What can we do as South Asians to address and perhaps eliminate forms of bias and discrimination?
It's a very good question, Deepa. I think all of us have an obligation to be more civically engaged. This is a proactive way of preventing hate crimes and discrimination and school bullying against members of our community. And by civic engagement, I mean showing up to your child's PTA meeting, sending your children to a soccer team and participating in those kinds of activities, participating in local government, showing up to a city council meeting. The important thing for members of our community is to be seen, to be more visible. And once we're more visible, I think we will educate our fellow Americans about our religions and our cultures, and in that way proactively solve a lot of the problems that we're facing right now.
Nadia, what would you say? Would you agree with Rajdeep?
Oh, absolutely. And the Muslim community post 9/11 has really taken that on as well. I think the Muslim community again has been the victim of hasty conclusions. And so what many people didn't know is that already our actions were sort of religiously mandated. A lot of the sort of the giving of charity, all of these different things that we've always done are religiously mandated. And so it's important for us to sort of get out there and inform individuals about our religion. And in the ways that we have gotten involved in terms of food, donating food, and doing more work at shelters, getting involved locally in government, getting involved nationally in government as well, as there are Muslims in Congress and there are Muslims who are working in Congress these days. It's just as Rajdeep said, it's important to sort of get out there and inform community members about our beliefs, our lifestyle, everything.
I think that what you're both saying is that the more Americans get to know South Asian Americans, Sikh Americans, Muslim Americans, they'll understand that we are vital members of our country's fabric, and that hopefully forms of bias and discrimination can be eliminated. So with that, I want to close this segment of Community Corner here on Darshan TV. Thank you so much, Rajdeep Singh Jolly from the Sikh Coalition, Nadia Ferozvi from the Asian Pacific American Legal Resource Center, for being with us here today and for informing our audience about the issue of bias and discrimination. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing all of you again on next month's Community Corner.